Hello, everybody. Hi, this is Radwan. Share.
Yep, this is Pierre. Welcome and thanks for joining. I think we can start with the
Yeah,
presentation already.
good. So what we'll be talking here is actually an entire approach. We are at Consilience Venture. We see a number of startups that are doing AI or claim that AI is a large part of their value proposition, products or services. And we will share with you a methodology or an approach on how do we assess these companies, mainly from a technical point of view, but also from a business or business model point of view. Okay, so you probably heard a while ago from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the key VCs and very renowned VC, Horowitz partner, that software is eating the world. And what he meant by this is that as an investor and institutional investors, that software nowadays is everywhere, that this brought them to change their strategy and their portfolio, where they see themselves investing in areas that they would not have invested before, going from agriculture to farming to healthcare to automotive, etc. Nowadays, definitely software is everywhere. But what we are seeing is that AI is even going further. Not only AI is eating the world, but is eating software. AI is becoming an engine. We start to see even AI automating a lot of application, even the generation and the development of software. Now, how much of this is really hype and how much of this is true? How many companies that claim that they are doing AI is AI? And that may even lead us to see what is AI and what do they mean? What do we mean by AI? I
Yep.
don't know if you have seen this on the news, which is uh, on the financial. It's there are a lot of European. We see that in Europe, that's actually European AI startup often do not use AI. But they just claim that they are doing AI. And this actually lead us to what is the buzzword? Maybe that AI is just a buzzword. And what do they mean by AI? You want to add something here, Pierre?
Yeah, sure. So it's all about always asking yourself when you see something claiming that it's done via AI. It's a twofold question. The first one is whether it's accurate in terms of results, and the second question is, well, was it really relevant to actually use AI on that topic or on that note? So if we want to move to the next slide, there is quite interesting topics at hand. As soon as you hear about AI, it covers so much of a variety of techniques. You can go into classification, clustering, regression, decision trees. It could be neural networks, topological data. So many things that can be actually involved in the process of machine learning and AI. But what really matters here is AI is meant to do just one thing. It's to fill in gaps and generating more data. So AI in the first place should only be used to generate data that you're missing, that you're after. And so prediction only takes information that you have at hand and uses that information and that data to generate other data that you don't have.
Yeah. So definitely, I mean, AI, when we talk about AI nowadays, these are nothing more, nothing less than just a prediction machine. And we should not, there was nothing, we're not going into what we call general purpose AI, which is a different thing.
So when you see the landscape of startups that we get in touch with or come forward and get in touch with us, you have many different categories of startups. Some startups that claim that they do AI, and within that group, you actually have startups that really do AI, and within that group, is that AI relevant to what they do? Was it actually something helping their value proposition? If the answer is no, well, it's kind of a waste. Whether the AI is claiming, the startup, sorry, is claiming that they do AI, but they don't, well, it's BS. And this is what we try to flag in the first place. Now, also, very often we have cases of startup presenting themselves with a product that doesn't necessarily put forward the fact that it's actually doing AI or could do AI later. So we also try to flag those startups because it's a missed opportunity for them whether their product could be leveraging AI or is actually leveraging AI and they're not talking about it. So it's always an adjustment to their message and to their value proposition. Whether you're doing AI or not, sometimes is irrelevant to what you're trying to convey in terms of message to your customers. So we try to help them adjust that by either removing, adjusting, or adding something that pushes forward the notion of AI in their value proposition.
Good. Mitesh, maybe you should do, yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
I've just launched a poll to see what do we think was the size of the AI investment in 2018, just to get a glimpse of a crowd poll. I'll give it a couple of seconds. Okay, 2 more seconds and then I'll end the poll. So what did you vote for? The survey results should be there. The majority of you believed that it was 5,000 million, 50%.
Yeah.
Followed by 50,000 million. What is that?
Billion, yeah. 5 billion, yeah.
5 billion, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So actually we were able to get some data. Oops, it's blocked. Yeah. And what we see is that there have been really steady growth of investment within AI startup or AI deep tech companies. So from 2008, where it was around 190 million, so the scale is in million, and it has been growing and doubling almost every year. So till to reach 27 billion in 2018. We do not yet have the report of 2019, but we do believe that actually it will keep growing and will more likely double this year, I mean in 2019. However, what we see is actually the number of deals also has been also growing, but then it went down. And the reason behind that, there are many reasons, that also the tickets are getting bigger, and we'll see in the next slide. There are also involvements of venture capital from series A, B, and C, and even later, which means that they are follow-up on the investment. So this is really an area of growing investment, and it's only will grow further because AI is ubiquitous, it's everywhere. It's going from healthcare to automotive to services to many, many areas. Here are a few featured companies. And as we can see, we have tickets going from 50 million to 100 millions, 900 millions, and even 1.5 billion. It's going from different sectors. Again, healthcare is one of the areas that see a lot of investments, especially drug repurposing, AI-led data companies that do drug repurposing or healthcare. We see a lot of biotech, for example, that are moving from what we call wet labs to currently looking for drugs through in silico, self-driving cars, robotics, and even, for example, like a graph core, which is hardware company. These are typically high performance company parallelization of computation. So these are the type of uh, investment. We can see that actually the series are going from series A, B, C, D, and even E. Some also we have some acquisition. You can see involvement again from whether VCs or from venture corporates like Cisco and others. Most of the featured company actually they happened in the US and in China. China is actually taking a big lead when it comes to AI and AI investment. We see a lot of companies from Tencent to a lot of visualization in terms of the application of AI to video and visualization. China is leading in this area, and we see lots of investments going on.
I think we have a poll to queue next.
Yeah, so just before this slide, when you need to have a due diligence performed over an AI startup, who is doing it for you? Are you doing it yourself? Are you getting a consultant to do it? Do you have a tech expert in your own company that can do it? Or do you go to an academic? So about 43%, we'll give it a couple more seconds. And I'm going to just end the poll and share the results. So a very large number of you actually do the due diligence yourself, or you get a consultant to do it. And a few of you have experts within your own company that do it.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so what we decided to go by when it comes to due diligence of startups in general, but also for AI, we came to the realization that very often the group of people assessed on due diligence is always the same in an organization. And this was identified as a mistake in the sense that every startup is different, involves a different set of knowledge base that is required to understand what they do, how they do it. So at Consilience Ventures, what we decided to adopt in terms of methodology is to build a group for each single due diligence process dynamically on the spot based on what the startup is doing and how they're doing it. This is a group that we call the review committee. And like I said, based on the nature and activities of the startup, it's rebuilt and reestablished on every due diligence. There is something else actually that we pay close attention to when we build this group. It's bias and conflict of interest. Very often you have people that would be suitable for due diligence, but either they have stake in that startup, so they might be biased, or maybe they have personal bias based on experience. So we always try to be critical on who is going to perform that due diligence. So yeah. So regarding the due diligence process itself, something we try to improve on, and that might be one of our key differentiator also, is that we try to make it distributed and to some degree, and hopefully more and more over time, decentralized. So people are tasked with no necessarily a central authority to perform the task or to manage that. We try to educate each and every one of our actors to be able to do that task to their best. And even though it's still very much like a due diligence, we also try to emphasize around the fact that it should be both ways. When we assess a startup, we very much look at if they're a good fit, but we also make sure that we are a good fit for them, and we give them the opportunity to see this process as mutual, not just them being under scrutiny, but us also being under their scrutiny, to make sure that we can bring them what they need later on in terms of accelerations and skill set.
How long does this process typically take, going from left to right?
It really depends on the nature of the startup, on the skill set required to do the assessment, on the availability of the startup owner. It has many different factors. It goes from a few weeks to, I would say, 2 months. So far, this is the ballpark, but it can vary really based on the nature of the startups.
Okay.
And yeah, and I think, I mean, related to this question, what we have done so far is that actually these are really session, which are working session. It's not only on a PowerPoint. We go on the board and the whiteboard, and often when we ask, and you would see this, I'm going to be talking more in detail on the assessment on the whiteboard, and ask people to explain us exactly what is the product, how it works, the flow, etc. So it is definitely dynamic. It will take at minimum 4 sessions or more.
So like Radwan said, the fact that it's dynamic is one thing. The other part is that we try to keep it highly interactive. So we're not trying to have people circulate a bunch of emails and papers and things like that. We really try to make sure that there is participation and as much explanation from the people involved in that startup as we can. So whiteboard, well, hopefully the world situation will change and we'll go back to the meeting rooms like it was before. Right now we do this via Zoom, but it's always a very different feel when you do this in a room filled with people, and there are lots of different things that comes out of this versus just reading and trying to crunch, you know, data from white papers and things like that.
But the other interesting thing is with digitization like Zoom, you can actually reach an international audience, and you can have different regions sort of contributing, and you get that diversity, which wouldn't have been considered previously to this lockdown.
Yep, that's correct. We like to think that what we do is not just digital. So we really like to be able to meet in offices and contribute around the whiteboards. But yeah, it helps facilitate the exchange. Yeah.
And even in our assessment, we had a mix. We had people in the room and some people calling from remotely, and that happened. So it is a mix. Okay. So let me move to the what do we look for when we do due diligence? We look to multiple area. Among them, definitely we look to the application area, and by we mean, okay, what is the industry, what is the application, what is the service that you are trying to apply AI, or the product, how does it affect the products? And we will go into more detail on these areas. The team, and by the team, definitely here we're looking, of course, to the competence, to the synergy of the team, but not only the team, how, as if they know the machine learning, the AI, but how do they extend their capacity? Because AI and machine learning is definitely a research and experimentation area. And unless upfront, you do this strategically, that you collaborate with academia, with research to keep up to date and to develop your skills and your competence, you're not going to be. So you have within this area, especially AI, you have to think about virtual and a complementary team, not only the internet. The business model, and again, we look to the business model here from the value proposition, from the segment, the customer, the pain that you are solving for the customer, and how the AI, is it just an add-on, or is it a complete deep change to the product, to the services, and even a re-innovation of the business model. And of course, the relevancy. How is this relevant? I mean, which means typically before even asking, are you doing these things right? We ask the question, are you sure that you are doing the right thing? Are you sure that this AI gonna help you, or is it just claim? Show us how you, what is the problem that this AI is solving that cannot be solved by other techniques or other means. And of course, innovation. And by innovation here, we mean from the technology perspective, which means what are the techniques that you are using when it comes to the predictive machine. Why are you using such technique and not other? How the model that you are developing, is it going to be generic or not? And from that, how this innovation is going to be translated into value so you can exploit it and commercialize it. And then we look to the engineering process. And by engineering process here, we're looking definitely to a combination from the software, the data science, and sometimes also the hardware. I mean, we are talking to companies that actually are doing AI on the edge. And the AI is either within a sensor or a small device. And that means it becomes a sort of integration between software, machine learning, or the data science and the hardware. And then we look into the technology stack. And when we talk about the technology stack, that means many things. Unfortunately, most techie tend to be religious, and they choose a technology or because without necessarily any reason for that. And technology stacks mean also partnership. It means now all this predictive, when we say AI is nothing more, nothing less than a predictive machine, it means a commoditization of the prediction. And it means that the value is somewhere else. There was no point of going and developing a library or framework on a natural language processing. Now this is becoming a commodity. And these are the kind of stuff that we will be looking for. So let me just give a little bit on the business model. So it is becoming almost now common than when in an assessment or as a part of a business plan or as a part of the tech that most investors and founders descend, you see the business model canvas. And within the business model canvas, you more likely will see, or hidden as a part of it, is the value proposition canvas, which is definitely what are, or written, who are your customers, what are the problems that you are solving. I mean, this is every VC, every investors will ask the question, what is the problem that you are solving? Are you just trying to, you are having a solution that is trying to find a problem, or technology that's trying to find a problem, or there is a real problem here. And from this problem, you are looking, what is the product? What are the feature and the benefit? And this is exactly this canvas here. This is the needs. These are the problems that you are solving. And here, this is how your product is solving. And then you map this into your business model canvas. The interest and the advantage about this kind of models and canvas is they help to be less verbose. They call things by their name. They give you guidelines. And when we talk about pain, when we talk about this, we know how to solve them. So then you map this to the value proposition. We try to understand the relationship, and then we derive the revenue streams.
So do you expect this from the startups that you're supporting as a prerequisite, or do you draw this up in a workshop and then you go through it together?
Yeah, it depends. So we would not expect them to have done this necessarily formally, but what we would expect that they would have the question to these. We will use it as a guidance. Then we would recommend them later on that to do these things. Now, even within this, we've seen a lot of BS because a lot of people misuse this canvas. So we've seen we've seen companies, and that gives you canvas, but in the end, when you look at them, there was nothing. But we use this for us as a guiding mechanism for asking the question.
Yeah.
Have you expressed the pain? Have you seen are these pains have been prioritized? Have you validated them, or is it just you who believe?
Yeah, it's a good way to represent the whole
exactly.
business
So
on one
that's
page. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But what we have added is an additional canvas, which is dedicated to AI. And this is related exactly to this aspect of prediction and judgment. As we say, prediction is going to be a commodity. So there are two things. You are definitely going to apply this AI to a product, service, and it goes into the decision-making process, because this is what is going to help. AI going to help into the decision-making process. And there are aspects of prediction, judgment, and judgment. This is exactly, so far, is mainly human, but more and more we're going to start to see this automated, and then the action taken from this, and then the outcome. And then underneath that, there was the data. And within this data, we need to understand what is the input that you are using this data. And we're going to go into more detail. There was a huge difference if you are using data that come only from survey, or you are using data that is real world data that is granular, because you know that you're going to take much more insight from it. So the data is going to be very important. And our objective why we do ask this question is to see how this canvas impacts the product design, how will it impact the pain, and are they going to help into solving some pain? And therefore, on the business model canvas, it's going to have either impacts on the value proposition itself, maybe creating a new customer segment that we have not thought about it, leading to a new revenue stream, or changing the customer relationship. So these are the kind of things. How intrinsic, or is it just a sort of cosmetic addition that this AI is doing? And this is how we're gonna assess the relevancy of the AI.
Cool. So Rad is starting to touch on one of the most important bit of foundations that every single piece of machine learning is going to be relying on. It's the data. So we try always to ask a few important questions when it comes to understanding how was that AI trained and built. Was the initial data unique in a way? Did it have some sort of unique differentiator that will make the model superior? And can you explain that? Like Radwan said, how well was it curated, normalized, structured? Because if you start with a very tiny amount of data and you just fuzz it to obtain a larger set, it's not really real world data. So it might be relevant in some cases, but in some other cases, it's just completely artificial data. So we also look at the narrowness or wideness of the data set. Was it collected with enough scope? Was the scope relevant to having all that data set gathered? And of course, the dimensionality of the data. Is that set complex or hyperdimensional? How did you establish all those dimensions? Is it based, for example, on time? Is it a time series based piece of data? Is it longitudinal? And this first approach to where that data came from and how it was shaped will lead to many other questions that we'll see now in the next slide.
Right. Talking. Yes.
It's fine. So there is always this question of cross data set leak. And I'm going to illustrate a little bit. If your initial data set contains information that you gathered on your guinea pigs customers, you might actually be running into a risk of leaking data from one customer to the next. Maybe your AI is going to give predictions or even leak information between two of your customers. So this is something that we also try to understand when you're explaining how you're pipelining that data into your training model and then putting that into production. Often you see production results and KPIs feedback on the data set. So this is also something that we try to keep in mind. If anything from production is fed back into the training data to improve your model, well, can it at some point start leaking between customers or between users? We also try to focus on a map of each piece of technology that is used on each step of that pipeline. For example, there are lots of questions about around contaminating licenses. If you use open source software at some point, is it permissive enough for you to use this into production? And then even sometimes, is the data that you are getting out of the system under the same copyright that the data that went in? And sometimes there are really, really tricky questions on that topic. Where do you host that pipeline? Is it hosted in the cloud, or is it in-house at your own, in your premises, or is it at the customers sometimes even? How do you verify and validate the model itself? So we're talking about what type of metric do you use to ensure adequacy of that model? And do you also have tests against real world data, and how do you manage that configuration? So regression tests, what I mean by that is, let's say you improve your model, or at least you think you're improving your model, and it's improving on the KPIs that you're monitoring during that current iteration. How do you verify that the impact on that improvement has not degraded previous results out of scopes for that particular test? And something else that we look for is the, let's call it the genericity of the model. Is it something that will only work on that particular case? Or will you be, for example, able to extend that model and make it generic so it can start working for other areas that you maybe haven't forecasted yet? Things like this. Regarding the actual software development, we're going to touch on the next slide, and it's not just.
Just want to add something else here. I mean, definitely. I mean, when we look into the modeling, etc., again, by catching also the hype we discuss, even here there are claims. There are claims from companies nowadays that everybody is using deep learning. And then I don't want to be necessarily technical, and sometimes this type of techniques is not necessarily relevant or applicable, and that's just for us to see why are you doing this, and we sometimes go into the detail. We have even been given the access, and Pierre, you can add on this. We've been access actually to GitHub and look into the software and the code, and to see the genericity of the source. So we are in a very good position that we don't just go again by talking or by the PowerPoint, but we have we established through this assessment a very good relationship with the founders, with the technical people, so we see exactly what they are doing and why they are doing, and then sometimes even recommendation. I don't think you should do this.
Yep, and to Raghot's point, actually, it's quite interesting. We were given access to several code bases, and for one of them, for example, we realized that the final product would only be able to take care of the particular customer that it was trained for. So in some cases, it's a non-issue. In some cases, it's an issue. It just means that this model wasn't generic enough to cover other customers. And so that particular startup had to change bits and pieces of code, whether a new customer would want to use that product, because the training that was performed for the first of their customer would absolutely not work for the second. And so, like I said, sometimes it's a non-issue, but if the product is meant to be general, that's definitely an issue. So we like to have a look at the code, at the training set, to make sure that this is a non-issue.
So one question, just before we move on, there's some really interesting questions coming through. And whilst we're on the topic, I thought, let me just raise them here. So like, who owns the training data and who is the owner of, and if the person that owns the data provides the data for the model, do they also own part of the model? That's from Hugh.
Yeah,
Yep.
we'll answer this question later on. We have another aspect on the data and the legal aspect. Just
Okay, so we'll come on to that. Hugh, there's some other questions just before we move on. I think it's good to clarify them here. How would you differentiate between forecasting and prediction? So in your AI canvas, you showed those 7 different areas where prediction was one of the key things. Is that the same as forecasting?
No, it is. Forecasting is a particular case of prediction where the variable is time.
Where the variable is time, okay.
Yeah, if I have to put it in a very simplistic and simple way. Yeah. The other variable is there could be other outputs or but here the variable is also you are doing this on time. That's
okay. And then one other question that came up earlier was, the definition of AI that was given is very broad, and people tend to use it like terms like cloud, right? It's almost become something that you expect. So does this mean that AI is now assumed? And is it become like, because it's part of the vocabulary, do we have a higher expectation of AI?
Us as Consilience Venture or in general? I mean, this is, by the way, there was no standard definition of AI up till today. I mean, I'm a part of multiple committee of standardization. It's yet to come, the definition of AI, but the tendency now is that we are trying to make the difference between general purpose AI, which is definitely mimicking the human in terms of reasoning, logic, etc., and the more narrow AI, which is about a predictive machine. The one that we are talking about are about prediction machine. That's the one we are looking for, and the expectation are to fulfill this one, not the general purpose AI. I don't know if I answered the question.
So I think that was from Ben. If there's follow-up questions, Ben, just put them into the comments. And then the final one, just before we move on the AI canvas, what do you put into the predictions box? That was also.
Yeah. So what you put into the, I mean, we that would require by itself a session to go through. What you put into the prediction box are. So in order to understand that, we need to understand actually the entire decision-making process. And within the prediction process, we are making the difference between prediction and judgment. Prediction are definitely the ability that you are able to derive missing information from information that you have. So for example, it could be I'm doing some diagnosis of the people, and I can predict the criticality of a disease or a stage or whatever. So these are typically prediction, is what are the elements you predict or the categorization or scoring mechanism that you predict. These are the kind of prediction that you are doing. Judgment is more the interpretation of this, to say it's not because I have predicted that the criticality is at this level that I am going to judge that actually this person is really ill, because then I might, or it's not because I have predicted or forecasted in this case that it will be raining that I will take my umbrella, because that has a cost. So in order to do the judgment, you need a value analysis. And this value analysis so far is the one that is still done by human, but I'm not saying it will not be done in the future by computers. So judgments are the output of the generation of the model. That's what you put into this case.
Okay, so this is a very interesting topic, and I think we'll come back
This is
to some
by
more
itself, it can be
questions.
a topic that we can give next time
Yeah,
on the clarification and the economics of AI. This is something we'd be more than happy to do.
It also overlaps with, at some point, ethics. And I mean, it's a good example. If you're predicting a trend, if you're just predicting a trend in population in illness, it's a very different type of prediction than predicting the evolution of a disease for an individual. And we'll touch base on that during a few next slides over.
yeah.
Ethics, quite important as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so as like any other piece of software, when you're looking at a product, there is a lot to be looked at to see and gauge about the sanity of the team that produces it. So with AI, it's a mix between operations and machine learning operations, so DevOps and machine learning ops. And we always want to make sure that the AI and data science process integrates well with software engineering, because it has more criticality to the outcome of the development cycle. So we're always looking at the methodology that is used, whether it's agile, waterfall, and if you're in an agile methodology, do you do Scrum? How is AI and data science embedded in your Scrum sprints, etc.? Very important, because it has much more impact. That part of your company has much more impact on the development cycle than in other cases. So also, how do you integrate with UI, UX, data visualization internally, not from your customer angle, but internally? How do you visualize that you're keeping sanity, that you have proper regression tests, that you're not pushing something into development that has not been QA'd properly? Who's doing the QA? How is the QA done? Is it automated? Is it verified by human beings? All those things. Very, very important in any company doing AI in their development cycle.
Yeah, I just also to add on the hype and the BS. Sometimes it's not hype, by the way. It's more culture. We've seen also a lot of organizations, startups, even if they are small, there was a separation between the software engineering team and the machine learning team. The machine learning, they describe themselves as more researcher. This is the trend. By the way, the salaries of the machine learning, and we can talk about, are much higher than the software engineer, and they are difficult, especially in Europe, to find data scientists and machine learning experts. And to have a culture, and that actually make them work both together. It's very important within an organization. This is definitely, especially for startups that are built to be machine learning AI, they have to watch this area. Is not to have the segregation between the software engineer and the data scientist in terms of culture or privilege. So the next one is actually, did say that actually data is a foundation, data is an asset, data is an important, but then there are many elements to watch because if you are not very careful, you might find yourself in a situation that you have a lot of regulatory regulation breaches, and we can go to jail. So definitely we ask questions about what are the precautions that you are taking, what are the processes and the governance processes that you are putting in place in terms of security, in terms of storage, what are the applicable regulation. And definitely, I mean, if you are in Europe, I mean, you're gonna need to comply with GDPR, that there was no doubt about it. The privacy, if you are doing with the human aspect, especially if you are in the healthcare area, are you putting in place any anonymization how strong and robust is this anonymization? Are you building it yourself? Or which is more likely it's going to be a sort of DIY, or are you relying on a professional aspect? And this is again where it goes all the question that you had. Who does the data belong to? Definitely the data belong to the provider, to the issuer. There was no discussion about that. The data does not belong to the company, does not belong, it belongs to the provider. This is, I mean, the regulation is pretty clear about that. However, the question is about the insights that is derived from this data and the model. Now, this is where companies have to be very careful and to seek here a lot of advice from IP lawyers and regulators, which themselves, it's still a black hole. How do you deal with the copyright, the IP, and how does it belong? So at least what we recommend is within the contract that you have with your customer is you should say that actually the model or any addition to the model is belong to the company as long as the others or the provider has not requested. And this is very important because otherwise you will find yourself that you in a very constrained environment and you cannot do anything, because that's the object of this company is to build model, and this is the product that comes. So this product should belong to the startup or to the tech company. There are a lot of also issues that are not solved. I mean, typically I can give some example in drug repurposing or farm, especially in biotech, about inventions. So all the inventions that come from the AI model, who is the author, who is the inventor? And apparently this is, if we have to write a patent, who do we put the name? Because the patents are generally named. So, and these are questions that are not yet solved by the regulation, and many lawyers are writing white papers, etc. to solve. So we don't have all the answers for this, but these are the kind of difficulties that you will face here.
So just watching the time, Rad, we're nearly coming up to the top of the clock. And then we probably want to open up for some questions and answers. But the next one, I think it's quite interesting. There were some questions around ethicality of data. And, let's just find out from the audience, when you're doing due diligence, are you primarily looking at due diligence on the technology? Are you looking at the ethical bias? Who owns the data? Who owns the model? Is it coming from the right place? And then is it the business model itself? And has it got a tight business model behind it? And can it be commercialized? Or is it all of them? So let's just hear from the audience. And there were some really good questions. So keep them coming in, around ethics and, around the definitions of prediction versus forecasting. All of them are quite relevant, and so keep them coming in, and then we'll shortly open up for questions. But let's open up this poll and share the results. So actually, you said all of the above: technology, ethical, and business model finances. So let's have a look at the next part.
Yeah.
Ethics and societal impact.
Yeah, so we touched a little bit on that, but let's develop a little bit more, keeping time in mind. So when we're talking about ethics and societal impact, there's two different things that we consider here. One of them being quite subjective, but we still like to run that. First of all, the bias of the training set. Are you even aware of the fact that you cannot be aware of being biased? So are you open to hearing criticism about the bias that you might have? For example, I don't know, it might be a silly example, but if I tell you that there was a noticeable, in hospitals, COVID was apparently less occurring with smokers. So there's a whole thing about nicotine actually preventing COVID or something like that. So where's that data set coming from? Is it biased? How do you actually sample those things? It's quite important. Then something that we really put under scrutiny is, can the model be perceived as discriminative towards whatever, race, sex, etc.? It's also very much related to the input training set. Where was it gathered, by whom, and in what context? I'm sorry, I'm trying to breeze through with time. And then the last one, which is very much subjective, are there any ethical or societal impact, direct or indirect? So regardless of that answer, what was the actual methodology to establish that answer that you give us? And if you're claiming that your product's going to help the world, well, have you tried to see it in different contexts? And will that really work in different contexts with maybe groups of people for whom the input data set is irrelevant? Things like that. It's always very interesting to look at AI from this angle, because something that might be a really good thing in one context had a too narrow input set to actually be positive in different contexts. So this is something we like to look at. I think we can move on.
Yeah.
I'm going to take on this one, Rada, yeah?
Take.
So it's a little bit about Consilience Ventures. It's how our vision, we're building a startup accelerator, but as a byproduct of this startup accelerator, because we try to digitize most of the interactions between actors, we're capturing those interactions. So we're capturing all the exchanges between experts, startups, investors, and we're not necessarily capturing the content. We're trying to capture their nature and whether that was a positive interaction, negative interaction, things like that. The idea behind Consilience Ventures since day one for me, which is not necessarily the case for the whole team, but that's my vision, is to at some point accumulate enough information and data to apply machine learning on top of it, and say maybe come up with suggestions for startups that come in, or even if we're not talking about the new startup that join, maybe about tickets that are carried within Consilience Ventures. Maybe that ticket was seen before. Maybe it exhibits characteristics that were already handled, and that we're going to be able to have some sort of automated learning algorithm to spot and flag things that might not be obvious for us as human beings. So it's going to be about patience, accumulating enough data to be able to leverage that. And of course, we're going to have to due diligence ourselves the same way that we would for any other startup. Look at the relevancy of the data set that we accumulate, look at whether or not it's biased, whether or not it can be generalized, things like that. In my opinion, AI is just a completely natural evolution of this platform. And automation and early failure detection will just come for free if we are capable of putting the right algorithms on top of that. And in terms of roadmap and accumulating that data, at some point we had to bootstrap the whole system, and this is when we had our first data in. It's not enough. We're going to have to, again, it's going to be a game of waiting, but we will at some point look for patterns and have maybe mining that data for patterns and evaluating different practices and linking them to performance, or maybe a suggestive AI or something like that. So that's the direction that I'd really like to see Consilience Ventures take within the next few years.
Perfect. Well, we've got a couple of questions that came through, and maybe we'll try some of them. I know we're running over time, but in the interest of closing them out, if you've already cataloged meetings, then please feel free to jump off. But please feel free to continue the conversation. One question from Ben is that there are a lot of engineers who build AI without the maths to fully back it up. How much has the commoditization of AI made it harder to sift out the ones who are genuinely solving hard problems versus the ones who have used something off the shelf in a novel way? And is it even important? So
Yeah. So I think Radwan will take on that one, but that's what I was about to say. Is it really important? First of all, does the problem at hand that you're trying to solve, does it have to be complex for you to apply AI on top of it? Not necessarily. You might be just applying AI to something fairly simple and come up with a solution that is as elegant as any other. So why not? So as long as the problem you're solving with your AI or without your AI is relevant to your value proposition, I would say, who cares?
Yeah, I think there was the relevancy definitely, but I mean, I would like to give an analogy, and I would like also to link it to another question of Ben about statistics. But first, I mean, that happens also with software engineering. I mean, how many people within that are software engineer and great software engineers that actually know about the underlying mathematics about computation, complexity theory, and Turing machine, etc. Not. I mean, I don't know many software engineers that actually know about the computation theory, but they are, or information theory, but they are pretty good. So the commoditization has also made it simpler, and we don't need to know the detail. Like, I do not know how probably my TV works. I mean, or my phone works. I mean, but I still a user, and sometimes I can do stuff. However, I would like to put a little bit pause here, Greg. So, and I would like to link it to the statistics. So far, when we defined AI, as at least the narrow AI, as a predictive machine, so these are nothing more, nothing less than statistics. These are type of statistic and what we call especially semi-parametric statistics, even the neural network that know. Now, it happens, I saw some flaws in many applications. Now, I'm not talking necessarily due diligence. Now, this is much more sometimes into going into technical stuff or talking to people when they do build their model because they use the wrong techniques. They use, because they don't look to the type of data, they assume that the data is normal, whereas it's not normal. And they don't know that they are doing statistics without. So definitely it helps. It definitely helps. And you have a difference between people who understand the statistics, understand the mathematics, understand optimization. So data science is actually a very, very broad topic that is going from software engineering to statistics to operational research to arithmetic, to many, many areas. And nobody can know all of these anyway. And there was the technicians who develop. And I think there are a separation. Luckily, we don't need necessarily always the math to go to solve this. But you need these people who are statisticians to be the guardian of the assumptions behind that. And if you are, I would say it depends also on the criticality of the topic. Definitely, if I am doing something in healthcare or safety critical system, I would definitely use a mathematician and statistician.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you both very much. That was a very interesting presentation, taking us through some of the methodologies that are being used by yourselves. And it's a full range of, looking at the business model, looking at the technology, looking at the ethics behind the data model. So it's quite a comprehensive scan, not just a kind of a light touch. So thank you very much for that. And just as a reminder, we've got some more sessions next week around medtech. What are the advances and trends in medtech? And what are some of the decisions that you need to make as an investor if you're exploring medtech as an option? Followed by space tech, and then followed by sustainability. And on the sustainability, we're actually inviting a couple of startups to showcase and profile what they've been up to. But at the same time, just a shout out to all the community to thank you for giving up your time and joining us. As a consequence of these digital lunch and learns, we've been approached by a number of different organizations, including ExoWorks, which I'm sure a number of you already know. We were in contact with them before COVID broke out, and they've offered us an exclusive a workshop for corporates to kind of navigate this very difficult period. So watch out for that. We've also been approached by Growth Enabler, who do some amazing work with startups and scale-ups in terms of profiling the industry and mapping it back and showing where the trends are moving from a data and analytics standpoint. And we've got some amazing entrepreneurs that are building solutions during COVID, which we'd like to profile too, together with Roger Spitz, who is a leading expert on AI in the Valley, was due to speak with us before this whole lockdown happened. And he's also putting together some digital content for us. So we've got some amazing content coming through over the next month. We hope that you'll join us on the calls and use the time productively to learn something new, connect with the community, and do something awesome. So until the next one, stay safe, stay well. Christophe, do you have anything? Radwan, Pierre?
Yeah, I would like just to add something. I mean, we are continuously looking for startups, AI startups in particular, as well
experts as well.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, so if you're an AI startup and want to get involved, reach out to Consilience Ventures. If you've been impressed by what you've heard, then feel free to get in touch. And anything else from anybody? Any other questions? Feel free to launch them here. Otherwise, we thank everybody for joining and look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for attending
One
and
thing,
hosting us.
Nikesh, if I can add on the top of this, we are preparing a rescue package or recovery package for startups who are in difficulties to raise capital right now because of the VC market lockdown. So if any of you are working with companies that are on the verge of being break even in the next couple of months, maybe 6 months, but they need a bit of a capital injection and support to get through that, please come to talk to us as well. We are not as dependent as most other VCs in the marketplace. So very happy to help. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone, and see you again next week.